Welcome back, and many thanks for staying with us right here on Morning at NTV. My name is Romy Busika, and of course I'm doing this with Sandra Twinobudio. At this point in time, we would like to talk about humanitarian workers who are taking on COVID-19 and other epidemics such as the Ebola that resurged in the DRC. Of course, this year we saw 27 attacks against aid workers who are responding to the resurgency of Ebola in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, out of those 27 attacks, 15 of them were actually against the aid workers, and then the rest, half of those, that is a third, actually one out of three, a third, they were actually from community members who had fears and misconceptions or misperceptions over the disease and the people who are responding to it. So we'd like to know, how are the humanitarian workers grappling or handling the COVID-19 pandemic itself? It's a double jeopardy, left, right and center. And now I'm joined by, that is Mr. Kamstra. Mr. Kamstra is the country director, Lutheran World Federation, Uganda, and he joins me right now in studio. But before I actually unveil Mr. Kamstra, let me just give you an overview. In 2019, 483 aid workers were actually attacked. 483 aid workers being attacked in 2019 in 277 separate incidents. Now, out of those 483 attacks, 125 aid workers were killed, 124 aid workers were kidnapped, and 234 aid workers were wounded in the line of duty. Most of those cases were in Syria. You remember the aerial bombardments? Yes, so many people were caught up. The aid workers, they were bombing hospitals. There were people in there, aid workers were working. So you kill aid workers, you kill the young children, and you kill even all those people who have nothing to do with the war. DRC, Central African Republic, we've seen cases culminating also in Yemen and Mali, who joined this list in 2019. Well, I'm now joined by Mr. Kamstra. Mr. Jesse Kamstra, he is the country representative or country director of the Lutheran World Federation, Uganda. Very good morning and many thanks for joining us on Morning at NTV.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me, and thank you very much for covering this day, World Humanitarian Day. Maybe a quick quick overview of the history. World Humanitarian Day is a day where we recognize, on this same day of the 19th of August, 2003, there was a huge bomb attack on the Canal Hotel in Iraq, killing 22 aid workers, including Sergio de Mello, the chief humanitarian officer. So in 2009, the UN General Assembly designated World Humanitarian Day, and now this is the 11th year we are recognizing and remembering aid workers. And the attack on aid workers, as you have already mentioned, behind those numbers that you mentioned, they are real people. And today the theme is real life heroes. Like you mentioned, since the day that this started, this is the 11th year that we're recognizing World Humanitarian Day. 1,235 aid workers have been killed while serving people in need. So that's a quick history.
Well, let's take a look at the attacks, Mr. Kamstra. Looking at 2018 and 2019, I realized when I was looking at the aid worker security report, there were 125 deaths, aid workers in 2019. But when you look at 2018, there were around 131. 6 more bodies were added onto that number. But then it got me thinking, there were lesser deaths in 2019, more deaths in 2018, but more attacks on aid workers in 2019. Help us understand what was causing this.
Well, aid workers work in risky areas. They go to help the people in need in very remote and risky areas, similar to journalists, war correspondents. You also go to risky areas when there's calamity, when there's natural disasters. You news anchors also go to cover those stories, and you take risks, and those risks come with the job. But it's very unfortunate, and also we need to make sure that the warring parties understand fully that humanitarian aid workers are neutral. They are there to help, and they are not targets.
Oh, okay, let's talk about the issue in the Democratic Republic of Congo. According to the Aid Worker Security Report, it also contains that out of the 27 attacks, 15 of those were against medical workers who were responding to the Ebola resurgence. And a third of those were from community members who had their fears and misconceptions about the disease and the people who are responding to it. Help us understand what was happening in the DRC. Do you also continue to see a rise in cases as we speak now?
Yes, DRC is an area where what are called aid workers that were responding to Ebola, and it's because of misinformation. That's why it's also important, and I'm very happy NTV is covering this, that we get the right information out, that aid workers, health workers are there to help. And even now, when we deal with this global pandemic, there are many, many aid workers. In Uganda already, I understand 20
but let's
health workers.
Let's first break down the misconceptions first.
Okay.
What are the misconceptions towards aid workers?
Well, that they're perceived to be biased, maybe.
Right.
Maybe they're perceived to be agents of various governments, which is not the case. And more aid workers, as you might know, are from the global south. As LWF, we have many Ugandans now already starting to work in South Sudan. South Sudan has been ranked the most dangerous place for several years in a row. If you look at that report,
since 2013, yes.
Yeah, if you look at that report, you'll see that Uganda is surrounded by, in the top 3, you have Syria as the most dangerous place.
Yes.
Then you have South Sudan, which is our neighbor here.
Yes.
And then we have DRC, right? Also our neighbor. And then 5th on the list is Central African Republic, which is not so far. So for Uganda also, we are surrounded by neighbors where humanitarian aid workers have been at risk. And there's Ugandans that are working. Apart from, you know, I did a quick survey among the humanitarian aid organizations here, and we quickly came up that there's at least over 10,000 humanitarian aid workers, nationals, working in Uganda, in remote areas, right? Yes, we have a beautiful country in Uganda, but there are very remote areas. I'm talking about Adjumani, Obongi, Lamo, and currently we have a lot of staff there that have gone for long periods without even seeing their family or coming to Kampala due to the lack of basic services, institutions, so they're keeping their children maybe in Kampala or other urban centers. So due to COVID, our first responders, mainly in northern Uganda and also in southwest, they're putting their life on hold, at risk,
Indeed.
And to respond to humanitarian crisis.
Let's talk about the neighbor. You did mention Southern Sudan. There were so many cases of bodily assault on aid workers, according to the graph that I saw. But then help us understand, since 2013, the situation was deteriorating, yes, but then in 2018, 2019, we saw the violence dwindling down because there was a transition out of that civil war. So help us understand right now, how is the situation of the aid workers within Southern Sudan? Is it more risky than it was? Or is it getting better?
Well, if you look at the statistics, it still appears to be quite risky, although the numbers are fewer. Several of the various factions have laid down their arms, but still the proliferation of small arms in South Sudan and the various groups remains quite dangerous for humanitarian aid workers to operate there.
Indeed. Let's focus on humanitarian workers in Uganda. What are some of the challenges facing humanitarian workers in our dear country, Uganda?
Well, like I mentioned, working in remote hardship areas. Now, due to the lockdown and the pandemic, they've not been able to go home, see their family, and they have to continue delivering. Without even mentioning that sometimes the people that have been affected by war, calamity, or other disasters are people that sometimes are traumatized and are difficult to handle and to work with. So our humanitarian aid line workers at the on the front line, they're putting their life at risk and on hold, and they dedicate themselves. And that's why the theme of World Humanitarian Day is real life heroes.
So what are these real life heroes' needs? Because we are talking about the challenges, what they're grappling with. But when they speak to you, what do they tell you that they need? What are their major needs to continue doing what they do best?
Well, they would appreciate understanding of what they do, because the assumption sometimes is that the opposite. So understanding, recognition, and
of their work, yes.
Of their work. And then, of course, we also need continuous resources to be able to protect
Right.
the duty of care of our staff, and also continue serving the people in need.
Mr. Jesse Kamstra is the country representative or country director of the Lutheran World Federation Uganda, and we are talking about the unsung heroes, the humanitarian workers who have been grappling since time immemorial. Well, according to the aid workers security report, 483 aid workers were victims of attacks in 2019. Out of those, you had 125 being killed in the line of duty, 124 being kidnapped, especially in Mali. Mr. Jesse Kamstra is going to be telling me about that situation in Mali. Why are there so many kidnapping cases within the Mali region? We saw aerial bombardments in Syria, but what about Mali? Why is this situation so debilitating as far as kidnappings are concerned? Mr. Jesse, let me get you on that. Mali, what is happening there?
Oh, I'm not very familiar about what's happening in Mali.
But according to your graph,
yes,
you have kidnappings taking over 80%.
True. Kidnapping appears to be a favored method of attacking. Maybe it is also due to trying to gain resources, so they feel that when they kidnap an aid worker, there will be a payout. But aid workers do not. Most humanitarian aid organizations do not pay ransom. So there's no point in holding us ransom because our employers will not pay ransom. After all, we get support from donors. So it's not as if kidnapping an aid worker will bring big benefits.
All right, Mr. Jesse Kamstra. As a person who has served in this humanitarian space for years, tell us about your experience as a humanitarian worker.
Yeah, thank you. Of course, working as a humanitarian aid worker does not come without risks.
Indeed.
Right, and tragedies. I recall when I first joined after the Rwanda genocide, one of our dear friends and colleagues in '94 was killed and shot by rebels here in Kagera.
Was it in the first week?
Yes, this is when I first joined LWF. One of our colleagues was shot and killed. And then as we continued in 2004, one of our national colleagues, Jacob Lushasi, was also killed by bandits in the Burundian operation. And more recently, while traveling to Juba via Nimuli border with some of my Ugandan colleagues, we were also shot at, and because of the skills of our driver, Leonard Abayo, he managed to avoid and dodge. So we were being shot at by some random rebel group in between Nimuli and Juba. So you see that our work does not go without risk. And there are many, many examples, as you've seen in the report that was issued, how many people are facing security risks in the line of duty.
So how is the Lutheran World Federation and other aid workers development partners grappling or trying to circumvent the disruptions being caused by COVID-19? How are you navigating those barriers to continue doing what you do?
Well, in Uganda specifically, the Ministry of Health included various humanitarian aid workers from the day one. We received stickers on our vehicles, and we were able to continue to work, raise awareness on hygiene, sanitation, and to prevent the spread of COVID-19. But we continue to, recognize all the health workers in Uganda that are going to extraordinary lengths to provide the services where other people maybe fear. But they are taking personal risks to help the fellow man in these very difficult times of a pandemic.
Would you say that the members of the public are conforming to the messages you're trying to disseminate?
Well, some people are, are conforming, but as you drive around in the, Kampala, you see quite a few people without masks. We're not wearing a mask at this moment because of the social distancing. I have my mask here. And people need to be really serious and avoid taking risk to save your fellow man. Even if you feel confident that you're not at risk, but do it for your neighbor. And so I think that's a very good point today on World Humanitarian Day, that everybody should play their part and protect the more vulnerable in societies. We see the elderly and people with health conditions are more at risk. So everybody should play their part. And I think no better day than today on World Humanitarian Day to challenge the public to also play their part.
To also play their part. We haven't talked about Yemen, which was also a pivotal territory that saw an upside in attacks on aid workers in 2019, unlike 2018. Help us understand what exacerbated the heightened tension among members who are living in the Yemen area and aid workers who are working there.
Yemen is an extremely difficult situation to work.
How so?
It's a very dangerous area. Many warring factions, also aerial bombardment. Access is limited to aid workers, even journalists. So it's extremely difficult to work, and at a huge danger to humanitarian aid workers to actually operate in Yemen.
All right, let's first get a very short break from this conversation with Here, my brother Stephen Imbido reporting live from Chambogo. He was talking to Mr. Patrick Amuriat Obo, the FDC party president. Let's get back into the humanitarian conversation with Mr. J.C. Kamstra, who also happens to be the country director of the Lutheran World Federation Uganda. Well, we were wrapping up before Bede hijacked your time, no Mr. Problem. Jesse. What message do you have for your fellow humanitarian workers? I think that was pertinent before we wrap up.
Yeah, thank you. And my message to humanitarian aid worker would be that it's a noble cause, and irrespective of your personal religious background, culture, social culture, there's that I've run across religion or belief that does not call on us to take care of our fellow man in need. So
it doesn't matter if you're a Christian, if you're a Muslim, no. As long as you have or exude compassion and empathy.
It is important to have compassion, a sense of duty. It is a calling, it is a noble cause, and irrespective of where you come from, it's very important to assist your fellow man in need.
Wow, Donald Trump needs to listen to this conversation. I think he'll get a type of version. Donald Trump needs to borrow a leaf on compassion and empathy. But what are your last remarks to all those individual actors who would also like to be humanitarian actors in the near future, or just from beginning now, after hearing or watching this conversation?
Yeah, in my last remarks, of course, I would do a disservice, of course, to not recognize the huge team in LWF and also all the other humanitarian aid workers, irrespective of which agency, UN, you work for. A big thank you. You are the real heroes. And then to the public that is watching, today you can help us, and each person can play their part and their role in assisting your fellow man. So today I call on you, I challenge you also to do something to your fellow man, out of a selfless desire just to help, not to gain something, because it's about serving, it's about providing compassion to your fellow man in dignity.
In a nutshell, anyone can be a humanitarian worker as long as you have compassion and empathy. My name is Romy Busika, and unfortunately, we've come to the end of this show. A huge birthday to all the kings, queens, boys and girls who are celebrating their birthdays on this particular Wednesday, the 19th of August, the year 2020. Have yourselves a lovely day and look out for the Virtual Delegates Conference of the NRM from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. Good morning.